Welcome back to Blooms and Bicycles. As we pedal into the springtime, we journey past trees in our local areas which are now dusted in hazes of pinks and whites. With the branches bare from the previous season until just recently, they are now gradually graced with the much-loved blossom flower once more. Without the green foliage of summertime, there's something really undistracting about this composition of just branch and flower together, which allows for a real appreciation of the deep mahogany tones in the branches against the contrast and delicacy of the pale pinks or whites in those tiny flowers which once in bloom become as delicate as tissue paper. And although their tiny petals would be well outsized by the grandeur of the other flowering varieties, every year when they do bloom in their thousands upon just one tree, their ability to captivate the masses across the world during blossom season shows just how much impact can be created when small things come together to create the larger collective. In this tutorial today, we'll be sharing with you how to construct the blossom season teapot letterbox flowers. Our vessel is already prepared with the water and the flower feed. However, if you would like to understand what to do to look after your flowers and to help them last for as long as possible, you can always refer to our flower care video, which you can find in the description box below via the link. So as we always do, we'll take the strongest of stems to create our grid. And in this collection, that is this beautiful white wax flower, which has gorgeous tiny buds as well as flowers when it develops, as well as an array of different eucalyptus varieties, similar to what we used in last month's collection with the Valentine's flowers. And then finally, towards the end, we'll also introduce some of this beautiful blossom. This gets added towards the end and not actually at the beginning because the flowers are actually really delicate when they develop. So we just gradually insert them gently around the design as the final finishing touch. So taking the wax flower to begin with, we'll trim it down into various pieces because there is a number of offshoots that come from the one branch. And now to do the same with our other piece. So we'll look for an offshoot which is about halfway up, and we'll just trim away on the angle slightly above it. So now we have two pieces. And just to take away any of the needles which will fall under the watermark, we can now see that this piece is probably slightly too long in comparison to the rest. And because of the beautiful flowers that are all yet to come, we wouldn't want the grid or this greenery to dominate or hide any of those flowers. So being mindful of that, we'll trim it down further again, giving us even more material to work with in our grid. And we'll just add those in. And can you see how they're creating beautiful sweeping pieces with lots of movement in the design already? Wax flower is beautiful and it has a very subtle lemony scent that comes from the leaves and the flowers when they move. It's not overly intense, but you will notice it in the room. It's really nice. And now to add in our small pieces of eucalyptus. As you will notice, the different eucalyptus varieties are the same as what was in the Valentine's collection. This is because with the peach blossom being the focal point in the blossom flower collection for this month, which come in a very cool pale pink colour, they almost have a bit of a blue undertone to them, and therefore has dictated what other flowers we've introduced into the collection, which also have those cooler blue undertones to them, so that it all marries together. And that's why we've chose cool green foliage as well. We get very excited at this time of year on the cusp of blossom season. Just as soon as we start to see a few pink petals here and there, we're all messaging each other. You'll have to let us know what your thoughts are around springtime with blossom season. Do you enjoy it as much as we do? So in this flower collection, we have 3 different types of chrysanthemums. As you can see, they are all a different shape and a different colour. And you know, it's took for me to become a florist to find a whole new level of respect for chrysanthemums and a whole new love for them as well. Honestly, before I became a florist, I would not have put them up there as one of my favourite flowers. However, the more I work with them, the more I love them, because you realise there are so many different varieties and so many different shapes. You look at a flower, you would not think it's a chrysanthemum, and then it turns out it is. And a perfect example of that are these gorgeous delicate pink ones, very much in the same shade as the blossom, and these gorgeous white ones which open up into this beautiful oversized head. As we've shown you in previous tutorials, they will come with a net around the bud. We leave them on and they will stay in place during transit while they're on their way to you to protect them. So if you just gently pull apart the net to release the flower, and all of a sudden you have this. So now that we've got two in the pink colour and one in the white, it might be nice to sort of create a natural balance by putting the white one in the centre and towards the back, and then to create our magic triangle, we'll put the other two on opposing sides lower down. So we'll just, by trial and error, keep inserting the stem of the chrysanthemums into the gaps now created by the grid we've established. And we'll just take a look at the height. So it might actually be nice to cut these down to different heights. First of all, because it creates different points of interest if you get those unexpected angles going on. And also because this one in particular has a nice natural sweeping shape to it, which is always a nice quirk to make the most of. And because the stem is being cut short significantly in comparison to the other two, it allows for a real tiered look between the 3 points in this triangle. And now to take our ranunculus. So with the Teapot letterbox flowers, you'll receive 3 of these stems, and honestly, they are like heaven on earth. What can also be good to do is observe the shape of each flower stem before deciding on where to place them in your grid. As you can see, each one is slightly different and leans more than another. So working this to your advantage, this one being the one that leans the most, I can see, I would put that towards the front so that you get a flower which faces head on as a focal point right in the centre of the arrangement. And then with this one, as you can see, it's much more upright. This would be ideal off to the back, therefore making the natural choice of this third one here as the one to place in the middle. So trimming away slightly off the bottom of the stem. And also just to say, to help increase the longevity of these flowers, they will come to you pre-wired. It's just something that we do because the stem itself will actually reduce the shelf life of the flower before the flower head itself sometimes, because with ranunculus flowers, they are very top heavy, so to speak. And we've just found, using a technique that we've worked with for some time now, that by pre-wiring them, your flower will last so much longer. And we want you to enjoy these flowers for as long as possible, because blossom season is just a beautiful time of year, so why not? And now to add our stem, which will go into the middle section. So just trimming some away from the bottom on an angle, as we always do. It's just a case then of trial and error to find a gap in the grid where it will sit in a place that you're happy. And then just to remove any of the leaves which would fall under the watermark, we'll then add this in as well. And if you've got all the time in the world, you might find you end up passing some hours away without even realising, refixing things and adjusting them into different positions. And if you have got the luxury of that time on side, go for it. That's part of the joy of flowers. However, if not, going with the natural burst effect works just as well. So now to take our spray roses, which come in these 2 different varieties, one of which is more like a frilly traditional garden variety, and one is in this more conventional swirling shape. So again, thinking about where things are positioned already, trying to envisage things before you introduce them, by holding them around the outside of the vase to get an idea for where the colours most complement the rest of the design. Can be just something you might want to do. So actually I can see here we've already got some very cool pink tones between this chrysanthemum and ranunculus. So a pop of the tangy pink colour from this variety would probably help break that up slightly and introduce a contrast and point of interest, as we always talk about. So that might be better towards the front. And therefore, maybe this one could be positioned towards the back to start building out where we now have some of a negative void here. So just keeping hold of some of your other stems if you feel like they're going to move too much. Again, just using trial and error to introduce the flowers into gaps in the grid until it sits in a place where you're happy. And now I can see that this ranunculus has probably moved just slightly too much. There we go. So just adjusting things as you see fit. And now we'll look to introduce our softer pink rose. So sometimes creating a gap on the opposite side of the grid to where you want the flower to be can work to allow it to sweep in the way that you want so that the mass of the grid in front of the stem holds it in the place you want it to be. So that's why I'm actually looking for a space on the opposite side of the grid to where I actually said I want it to go. So can you see how that's held itself now? Whereas if I would have tried to introduce that to the grid on the side I want the flower to sweep, it would have fell out. And now to introduce the hyacinth, which comes in this beautiful soft white colour, which slightly contrasts the colour of the chrysanthemum added so far. So we're going to just lift away, find where there's a natural curve in the flower, and allow the curve to face downwards so that the flower sweeps down out of the grid, away from the teapot. And again, these hyacinths will also come pre-wired, just to allow the shelf life to be extended as much as possible for you, because we want you to enjoy them as much as you can. And the grid is actually starting to get quite full because some of these flower stems are actually quite thick, which is why we wait until the end to add in the smaller of the stems. And in this case, with this collection, they are this beautiful variety of Scabiosa, which looks really frilly from a distance and changes in tone from a dusty pink around the outside to something of a fresh green on the inside. And actually, when you get up close, you realise that they aren't just petals, they are mini flowers all clustered together to create that floral effect, and it's gorgeous. Again, because I now think this would be best to sweep off and fill this void here, I'm just looking for a gap in the opposite side towards the back, because now we can start to use the massive stems that sit in front of that gap to hold upright this Scabiosa, just so, she says. There we are. And now to take this beautiful variety of anemone, which hasn't quite opened up yet because they are that fresh. However, at least you can see how fresh the flowers are that we give you. These will eventually open up into a white flower with a darker centre. Again, just not contributing to the snowy white tones that run throughout all of the items in our blossom flower collection. So again, trimming away on the bottom. These are also pre-wired as well, just to say. We'll just add these in where we find there is some negative spaces. And at this point now, any stems which are being introduced are sitting very high at the top, towards the opening of the teapot. So again, just being mindful to make sure the teapot is always filled to the very top, to allow for those unusual shapes to be created in your grid with your different flower stems. So I think we'll just have to come around to the front to add this final one. These are very soft stems, as are the ranunculus, so just be very gentle as you insert them into the grid. And actually I think what we'll do, because this one will go to the very front, I've actually trimmed it right down, as you can see. And there's just a gap there. And see how beautifully that sits. And because of this natural curve in the stem, just gives it that real natural wild look. And now to add our final statement piece, this Lysimachia. And with it being such a tall stem, and because we probably need something to counterbalance the white distribution given by the chrysanthemum, which is now veering off slightly to the left, this would be ideal, placed on the opposite side, slightly to the right. And we've just got one final gap, which was perfectly positioned for that final stem. And now on to the focal point, the blossom stems. So in this collection, you'll receive 7 of the stems. So if we just look to dot these in gently around and about, some will be longer than others, as you can see. So maybe keeping the taller ones towards the back, we can then position the shorter pieces towards the front. And these peach blossom stems, they come with a bud which will develop into a bigger pink bud. Every now and then though, if you're lucky enough, some of those buds might sprout into the flowers. They're not supposed to. However, if you keep your flower arrangement in a cool room with plenty of water, then you might well get a couple of flowers off your blossom stems, as you can see. And when they do bloom, they are beautiful. So simple, but just stunning. So you will get a number of different peach blossom stems in every item within the collection, because we just felt like you need to see the blossom in these flowers. It needs to take centre stage to celebrate the season we're in. So now I've just found that given the new stems introduced, it's pushed some of them too far over into one side of the design. Therefore, we'll just look at what negative voids we have and try and make sure that if there has been any stems that have moved, they're repositioned to create that natural balance. I'm just going to come around the front to see how that looks. It's always a little bit more tricky trying to create a design from the back when you can't see what's fully going on. And that's looking better. Now what's quite interesting here is that these ranunculus have gradually grouped together into a much smaller triangle. So you could rearrange these to create a wider triangle. But actually there is something about this which I really like, because it's so unusual and not actually anything you would consider normally doing in a design, but it's very much the way it would grow in the natural environment. So I'm going to keep it like that. I quite like that irregular cluster together. It's unexpected, so it will be another point of interest in its own unique way. And just making sure our blossom flowers can be fully viewed, if there are any. And making sure our stems have not moved too much where they are falling out or away from the water. And pushing this rose back. Actually, what we might do, given the blossom that's now being added in, we might position this behind the blossom just for extra support. And I think this is going to look much better by the time I come round the front again to have another look. And finally, to add, this beautiful asparagus fern, as delicate and intricate as lace. This can also help with filling any of the voids which are finally there. And it doesn't actually have to sit in the water as we talked about last month. It can actually sit above the grid. So you will get long pieces. You can leave them like this if you like. And you could always use it to dress the arrangement by allowing the leaf to curl around the front of the design. So that's one option. Or you could split it up into several pieces. And that's what we'll do today. So cutting around the halfway mark, just underneath one of the offshoots, we're then going to weave this in very carefully around our ranunculus and roses and allow it to float, almost like a cloud. Now we have this other beautiful piece. So again, gently, we'll introduce it by weaving it in between some of the stems. And because it's such a flexible material, you can just wrap this so that it winds around the stems in a very wild way. And you might also just want to gradually lift away some of the stems. They might have fell lower into the grid than you wanted them to as you were introducing new pieces. So as part of your final inspection, you might just want to loosen the arrangement again. And as our final last piece, in goes our remaining piece of peach blossom. So taking one final check. And there you have it, the Teapot letterbox flowers from the Blossom Flower Collection. I hope you enjoy the start of spring and hope you enjoy blossom season. See you next time.